Hello and welcome to How to Tell Good Stories. This is number 7. Today we are speaking with YouTube comic reviewer and comic writer, the Man Called Kemosabe, Lee Byron Carver. He has a comic funding on Indiegogo called The Company Man, Dead, White, and Blue #1. It is in fact written by Kemosabe himself, Lee Byron Carver, with art by Kelso Magazine, with an available variant cover, by the way, by Clayton Barton of the Barton Bros, who's been seen on Replicator and Kozar, which is looking gorgeous, with colors by Corey Barton, and there are beautiful original art pages available to purchase as add-ons. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. And so we welcome today the Man Called Kemosabe, Lee Byron Carver, as we talk about telling good stories. So welcome, Lee.
Yeah.
So this is our first time talking, but I've actually added you in a few comment sections before, just because you're an old stay comic book internet and comment sections. So, but the first time I ever noticed you was in a Conquest Comics live stream, and and you were being very vocal about stuff, and
that sounds like me. Yeah.
And the weird thing is I kept agreeing with you, which is weird because I tend to disagree with even myself sometimes. So I'm kind of like, wow, but I kept seeing you pop up in various chats, and before long I realized I had no idea that you were reviewing comics. And I know at one time you lost a channel that had stuff going on in it.
Yeah.
And but so I just want to give you the floor. Give us a quick rundown. Tell us about yourself and how you got started in all of this.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and g'day everyone. I'm the Man Called Kemosabe, the man with the plan from the land down under, Lee Byron Carver. I do review comic books on my YouTube channel, Kemosabe Returns. I'm creating comic books. I've created a comic book. I've got more on the way. G'day Dan, g'day Abba, g'day Eric. A bunch of people come out to say g'day. That's fantastic to see in the chat. And hi fellas, thanks for being here. And I got into all this simply because that's what I always wanted to do. I've always told stories. I can't not tell stories. My reaction to a piece of media is, hey, that was cool. Imagine if this happened instead. Hey, that was a great movie, but what if it ended that way? You're watching a movie and things are going a particular way and you're starting to predict. We all do. We all make predictions. And you think, I think it's going to go this way. And if it doesn't go the way that you want, if it doesn't go the way that you had worked out in your head, you go, well, that seems like a wasted opportunity. There's a whole story there. There's a whole story that could be told. And there's more than one way to tell a story. So I was always coming up with ideas, always coming up with alternate stories, always wanting to be a storyteller, not like a class clown life of the party sort of thing, but just this stories bind everything. Stories give us a backbone through society. We were talking earlier about oral storytelling tradition amongst Indigenous tribes. And when you say Indigenous, like Celts and Scots being, Indigenous to their region, that sort of thing, like regardless of ethnicity, there's Indigenous people in all parts of the world that have got a long-standing oral tradition. Storytelling is hugely important. People say, why do you write? And I say, I write because I can't not. Like, I can't, like, if I had these ideas coming into my head and I didn't put them down on paper, or at least on the computer screen, I think I would snap. I think I would explode. I think and when I say real writer, I don't want to upset anybody, but I think like a real writer writes because they can't not. You can write, you can be a creator and create, and you can write a story. Like comics mate Dean James just turned up in the chat. He's got a book coming out called Other Earth. It's a fantastic book. I've read the script, a little bit of editing on it, hardly needed anything done. Like, he's a natural storyteller. He wouldn't count himself as a writer. He's a creator who writes. He's a hell of an artist. Incredible artist, just getting better and better with every project he works on. Really lucky to be working with him on stuff in the future. But he wouldn't call himself a writer. I think somebody who is a writer writes first and foremost. That's how they see themselves. I always say anyone can write, not everyone's a writer. So I'm a writer.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, and I had said before, I think the most important thing is being a storyteller. And I think it's important in life, just because I feel like people who are storytellers tend to it expands their knowledge and their breadth of knowledge. Because I see, as a kid, I tell people I started out as a liar, and then I realized I could tell a good story. And so I started to research my lies so that I could get better at telling them. And next thing you know, I became a pretty solid writer. So it sort of worked for my favor. But I've noticed most of even the kids that I knew, that, like you said, the class clown, if they could at all tell a story, then they've got a creative outlet, and they'll probably go far in the future with something.
Hold people in the palm of their hands. You can enrapture an entire classroom of kids or an entire classroom of adults. The best comedians are storytellers. The best comedians, like, I went to the shops the other day, and whether it's true or not, whether it's an exaggeration of the truth, they're telling you a story. It's not just, boy, I just flew in and my arms are tied. It's not just set up punchline. Even the comedy shows that operated like that, like the sitcoms and stuff that operate on set up punchline, had a bigger overarching story. You need to, otherwise there's no stakes. It's just faceless person reacting to unconnected event. We're all connected. Right. It's the human condition. Storytelling reflects the human condition in a way that we can all relate to, we can all consume. It's necessary. I often say, I like video games and comics and art and drawing. A lot of that stuff's not strictly necessary. You look at your hierarchy of need, Maslow, I think it is, hierarchy of needs. Mm-hmm. And the higher up you get on it, stuff like acceptance and safety are less important than food, oxygen, and shelter. And beyond shelter and safety and acceptance, you find stuff like art, music, creative outlets. Those creative outlets are less important than a solid social structure that accepts you and keeps you safe. And those things are less important than food, water, oxygen, and shelter. But I would say that storytelling supersedes that stuff and sort of sits between the essentials like food and water and the stuff like acceptance, because without that storytelling, without that understanding of the cohesive narrative, you're not functioning in society anyway. You're removed from society. Everything we do is storytelling linked. It's supremely important. And those people that are gifted with being able to write are incredibly fortunate beings.
Right. Yeah. And so when you were young, were you more of a book person, a comic person, a movie person? What was the television? What was the thing that got you, that when you saw it, you would just bury yourself in?
It was definitely comic books. I mean, I read a lot of books as a kid. I don't think you can be, no, you can't be a good writer unless you read a lot. You'll always be very, very limited by what you can do. And the tools in your toolbox will be very limited if you're not exposing yourself to a wide variety of different styles and tools and objects and things that you can use in your storytelling. There's definitely comic books for me, but I remember being a kid and reading a Spider-Man issue. I think he's fighting the Shocker in that issue. And I saw the credits down the bottom and I realized it's like 8 people to make a comic book. So I'm like, forget that. I want to, it's my show. This is me. I don't want to be sharing. I don't want to write it and then hand it off to someone else, have them draw it. I mean, I wanted to be a comic book artist at first, but I'm a better writer than I'm an artist. So I decided to lean into that, particularly when, without being too much of a segue or getting too sidetracked, a lot of the stuff coming out in the indie scene was by people who, again, I would call creators rather than writers. There was some solid stuff, but it wasn't necessarily that finely tuned sort of stuff that's going to get people coming back over and over again, rereading that work. The amount of times I've sat down and read Warren Ellis's Planetary from cover to cover, I've got all the trades. You can sit down and read the whole story in a day. And it's just an incredible story. You go back to it and you pick up new things. Some of that early crowdfunded stuff and indie stuff you might not necessarily go back to. It was solid but simple. So lean more into the writing side of things as time went on. But comics is a visual medium, and that's what captured me. The 4-color stories, superheroes. I mean, that's my jam. That's what I want to do. That's what I do now. I've got a superhero team. A comic that's come out. It's been fulfilled. It's got overwhelmingly positive feedback. The second book's more than halfway done. So that's what I'm going to be doing in the near future. But I also write novels. I've got a bunch of novels that are written, various states written, getting covers made for them. I'm going to start releasing them in a staggered release. I wanted to build up a trove of books that I can then release them every couple of months to build up momentum. Some people, they say, I've only got the one book in me. I've only got the one story in me. Or you got those authors that release a book and then don't release a book for 20 years. I don't want to wait 20 minutes without writing. How are you going to wait 20 years without writing another book? I got more ideas than I got years left in my life. Like I got to get moving. I got to get stuff done. It's all out there. There's so much potential out there, especially with e-publishing, the move away from traditional publishing. Sky's the limit, boys.
Right. Well, I mean, there are obviously people who just, they write, they have a story to tell, and once they get to tell it, it's sort of done. But I do think there is that eternal sort of back and forth between different writers, because some want to be they want to be the the Lewis, the C.S. Lewis, and just release something every 6 months to a year, no matter what it is, and just keep writing. And others want to be that Tolkien, where it's like the story is so important that they end up averaging releasing a book between 13 and 20 years apart. Like tell three books in your entire lifetime get actually published.
And there's also that probably that divide between literary fiction and genre fiction. You people who are really into the literary fiction might write some deep treatise about life in the Dust Bowl, sitting there watching the fat of the pancake of the bacon congeal on their plate, and it's just this mundane look at the life of a man stuck in the depression in the Dust Bowl. And it's a searing, in-depth look at the foundations of what built in America, maybe. And he only puts out a book every 20 years, and it comes to rave reviews, and it's put in the school curriculum. And I don't know, whatever sales it does. And then you got, like you said, people who put out books every couple of months. There's dudes out there putting out a book a month. There's dudes out there putting out 40, 50,000 books. I mean, 40,000 words is bordering on a novella, I think, but 50,000 plus 60,000 word books every month, every other month. You got guys like Adam Lane Smith. He puts out half a dozen books a year.
Right.
Declan Finn, he must have at least 4 books come out every year. So these guys are just working at a prodigious speed, and there's parallels between pulp authors, sure, but I think we can use a bit more pulp these days. I think we can afford to have a move away from book of the month, Oprah Book Club type literary fiction, and move towards genre fiction, because that's where the fun is, and that's where expectations are met, and that's where people get their escapism, and they get that storytelling that can connect you to the human condition. Those big brain literary stories, those Old Man and the Sea type things, they might be cultural icons, they might be cultural zeitgeist for the time that it comes out, and they might have an impact throughout time, but are you here to, it comes down to what are you here for? Are you here to tell an amazing story that changes the world? Are you here to tell the stories you have to tell because you can't not, or are you here to make money? And they're Venn diagrams, there's overlap. You can certainly want to do 2 or all 3 of those, but how heavily you lean into one, obviously being a Venn diagram, removes you from the other. If you want to lean into that literary fiction, I think you're going to be pushing yourself away from that making money circle. Those two, there's not a huge overlap between those two, or there's a limited time frame for that overlap.
Right. Well, yeah. And then you also have the difference between some people just comment on culture, others create the culture, and then others are just telling stories to be telling stories.
What's that paradigm where 5% of the population makes 95% of all entertainment and media, and have you heard of that one? It's like, there's some statistic,
a very low number, exactly.
So there's a very few number of people, and they make the majority of the stuff that people read and engage with, and it means media, TV, video games, whatever.
Yeah, and I have to say, I one of the reasons why I started doing the storytelling thing is because I've been reading a bunch of, and especially with the crowdfunded comics, I've been getting a bunch of them, and it's sad to see that even really good writers, people I think have great writing, you can see it in there, that they just lose it because they're so worried about this big story and telling the overarching, that I think there's something to be said for simple. I think there is really something to be said for simple, because the greatest stories that probably every person has ever heard of are sometimes even the same story, just retold 5 or 6 different times, and it's just simple really has a purpose. It allows the writer to just open up and be creative.
Yeah, because the framework's there. We know what we're getting, not how we're getting it. We know the what, we don't know the how. The how is what that author provides, and the what that each author provides is their own style. You might Jason Black said something along the lines recently of the idea doesn't make the author makes the idea. You give the same idea to you, me, half a dozen people from the chat, half a dozen people that are making books, and say, right, get me from point A to point B. We're all going to do it differently. We're all going to do it in a different style. The way that Stephen King gets you there, sort of this slow burn build, very real life, mundane, and then juxtaposed with something that's bizarre or outlandish, and that's what makes it so horrible. That's going to be different too. I'm looking at a lot of like Japanese horror at the moment, because I got a script I've been commissioned to do, and it's got like a Japanese edge. So I'm looking at that sort of, that bizarre body horror type stuff they do. That's a very, very different strain to something that he does. And that's just within the horror genre. If somebody wants to get there with action, with thriller, with psychological type stuff, that's a whole different kettle of fish. So we provide the what, the how, we provide the how. The what is what we know is going to be we know what we're going to get. We know what we're getting, and we're getting the hero's journey. We're getting Luke Skywalker coming off the farm and becoming the chosen one. How do you do that? You know, what's that look like? What is what we provide, and not everybody can do it.
No, but I think everybody should at least give it one good go to try and see what they got in them. So I encourage everybody to write, to tell stories, to just see what you got.
One of my greatest joys is to encourage someone to write, to say, well, give it a go and see what they've done and give feedback. I also do a lot of editing for people, paid and unpaid. Sometimes it's just to give advice. Sometimes give just like some broad feedback. Other times it's a directional edit. Not so much a line edit. I mean, that stuff can be handled by, your beta readers, the people that look at it, and yourself. Like, you should be able to pick up a lot of that sort of stuff yourself. But directional edit and consistency, that's the sort of thing I like to provide and say, well, you mentioned this early on, but how does that link to what you've had further down? Thematically, you could add something in here and bring the whole thing full circle, and that would have a deeper theme to the whole story. So I've just encouraged my wife to start writing recently, and she's actually really talented, and she didn't know it. But I could tell from what she was reading. I could tell from how she interacted with media. I could tell from her feedback on my stories. I could tell how she thought about storytelling and the pacing and the plot and the structure and that sort of stuff. I go, here's somebody who has all the tools. No one's ever said to her, hey, instead of jumping on Fruit Ninja, I think that's a thing. Instead of jumping on Fruit Ninja for an hour, why don't you go write something? Right. And now she's like 5 books in. She's writing Australian romance, obviously, been that's the sort of thing she wrote. So that's the thing she wants to write, but she's good. Like, she's really good. And seeing the joy that she gets from writing approaches the joy that I get from my own writing. Just seeing her sit down and open up a laptop and get started. And she might come at me with a question, and she said, hey, I've got this. How would you write this? How would you phrase this? What's a better word for that? That interaction, we sat down in some really in-depth editing on her work the other day. We were over at a parent's place, and we just went out on the deck there in the sun, and we just went through it with a fine-tooth comb for the first couple of chapters. And it was just an incredible experience to be there in person with somebody that you've got a deep connection with, and then to just very, very finely pull apart every line they've put together and talk about what their motivation was, is a searing insight into my wife's mind and seeing the joy that she got from making those connections and even improving the work that she'd done. There's nothing else like it. Editing's a fantastic. If you ever get the chance to edit someone's work, beta read it, give feedback, whatever, like, please do. It's not just paying it forward, because I'm sure somebody else has looked at your work, but you'll find stuff out about yourself. Because you've got to verbalize what it is. You think, I didn't like that. Okay, well, why didn't you like it? Tell them why you didn't like it, explain it, and then give them a solution, a workable solution they can put into action right now, not just some sort of ephemeral, I didn't really like that sort of thing. Tell them what didn't work, compare it to something else, go read this, go look up that, rewrite this, think about this sort of language. There's a bunch of online editors and tools that can help you enhance your language as well. Give people access to that sort of stuff. If you've got this wealth of knowledge, if you like to write, I don't see how you wouldn't like to edit as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And going along with that, what you're talking about, it doesn't have to necessarily be something that you enjoy or is in your genre of preference, because I've had people think I'm weird because I'll give really good marks to something and say, I didn't like the story, and it's not my book, but it was really well written. And they'll say, well, how can you do? And I said, because I can see what went into it. And even though I don't like it, I can appreciate what the person did. And I might even be able to learn from what they did, even though it's not my thing. And so I agree with you about editing and just looking over things. And especially one of the big issues right now, and again, why I use the term, because when naming this series, how to tell good stories, I did that because I think every writer needs to say their words out loud. And does it make sense when spoken out loud? Because that is the number one issue with dialogue and all kinds of issues right now, is that try to say it out loud. Does it make any kind of sense? Or is it just fumbled in a mess? So, go ahead and be willing to invoke a little bit of emotions, say it out loud. Does it make sense? And that's how you edit yourself, because just reading the words on the page, you can't edit it because you know in your heart what you're trying to get out. But if you say it out loud and you can hear your voice back to you, sometimes you suddenly go, oh, you know what? That's stupid. Or
absolutely. It's And see, if like I got a bunch of writing, not a bunch, like a dozen writing advice videos on my channel, and I go into that and I say, if you're stuck, not sure how to go forward, like go back and reread the bit that you're trying to write, the bit that you're stuck with. I take it even further. I say, get up out of your seat and act it out. Be that character. Do the things they're doing. Open the door, slam the door, pick something up, like put yourself right into there, because it's not just the words on the page, like you said. They're so spot on with that. It's the inflection, it's the tone, knowing when there's a beat, knowing when there's a gap, knowing when you change. You just got to remember that. I remember seeing it on a poster somewhere. It said, there's a sentence, I never told you I was going to the movies, or something like that. And every time you change the inflection on one word, it changes the whole meaning of that sentence. So I didn't tell you I was going to the movies means somebody else. I didn't tell you I was going to the movies, which means I didn't tell you that. I didn't tell you I was going to the movies. Well, putting the inflection on tell means I implied it in some other way. I didn't verbally tell you. I already got 3 interpretations of the same sentence just by changing. I didn't tell you I was going to the movies. I told someone else. Obviously, you heard from them. So you can go through every word in that sentence. And if you change the inflection on each one, it changes the whole meaning of that sentence. If you can do that with a mundane sentence like going to the movies or going to the shops or whatever it was, imagine how much changing the inflection on a single word on your deep exposition dump character building bit of dialogue matters. Like you've got to, if you can't verbalize it in your head well, if you're not someone who can, I consider dialogue to be probably my greatest strength. I think my dialogue's pristine. Not that I wouldn't listen to feedback from someone else. Aardvark's edited a bunch of my stuff and he gives me fantastic feedback. He's like an encyclopedia of feedback. He's just constantly hitting you with just getting you thinking about everything you put in there, not second guessing yourself, but justifying it in your head why you did. And if you can't do it, you'll find an alternative in your story that's better for it. He's a great guy to work with.
Right. A term I'm going to throw out real quick, just because to get on this, is that, and even though lately he's been a bit of a putz, one of my biggest inspirations as a kid was Kevin Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And I would listen to him talk when I was a kid, because one of the first movies that really made, because I've actually made like 5 films. And,
that's cool.
One of the first ones was, Clerks. And I just was like, that opened my eyes that somebody could make something that was legitimately decent, like not even good, but decent, on like $5,000. And I was just like, that's something. And so I started paying attention to him, and he said, you have to be willing to kill your baby. And he said, as weird as that sounds, he's like, you get attached to it. He goes, but when somebody gives you feedback, you can't take it personal. You have to be willing to know that they're legitimately telling you something that's useful. And you yourself have to look at it and say, okay, I want to tell this, but do I have to say it? Or do I need to put it in there? Or, and again, if you can't justify it, and if it doesn't fit, it just doesn't fit. And you have to be willing to kill it, just because it's not going to help. If you can't
absolutely, there's a bunch of stuff to unpack there. For starters, your work is not you. The quality of your work is not a reflection of you as a person. There's some people out there that are complete D-bags that do great work, and there's wonderful people that I love that shouldn't. I wouldn't say they shouldn't be writing. I just say they should hire me to write it instead, and I'll write their story for them. I tell the story a lot. When I went to art school, in between high school and other stuff. We had a teacher there, and he used to, you'd be in the studio, you'd be painting a big canvas in front of you, working in oils or whatever. And he has this little pot of tar black paint, and he just circle around the room, and you're just there begging, please, Jesus, don't let it be me. Anyway, he'd come over to you and he says, Lee, what's your favorite part of this painting? What's the part that you're most proud of? And you're like, John, don't do this to me, man. I'm right in the middle of this painting. It's looking good. He goes, no, tell me, what's your favorite part? What's your favorite part? And you're like, the chair in the corner of the room there, I like it's the geometry's perfect, the perspective's perfect. I'm really happy with the way the light's off. He's there going, oh yeah, that's really interesting. And the whole time he's like poking his little paintbrush in the pot. You know where I'm going with this. And he gets this tar black paint, and the son of a bitch blacks makes a box of black right over top of your favorite. Like he just takes your favorite part and he just has a big patch of black right over top of it. And then his attitude's like, okay, now cope. Come back from that. It was brutal. Mm-hmm. It was awful. He didn't do it all the time. He only did it to me like twice ever, but he would black out your favorite part of the painting. And you'd have to deal with that. Like you couldn't be precious about it. One, because it's not you. It's not a reflection of you. It doesn't matter how deep and soulful your story, your painting, your creation is, whatever. It is not you. It is you telling a story. And the quality of that story doesn't reflect on you. And I remember another, some artist, someone like Joe Matt or whatever, and they said to him, what's your favorite artwork? And he said, whatever I'm working on at the moment. He goes, because it's always got to be better than the last thing I did. If I feel like if you are so angry that this guy wrecked your painting or gave you negative feedback on your story or whatever, that you can't do better next time, like that can't be your baby. It can't be the most important thing in the world to you. And
Right.
there's overlaps with people who have got that one story to tell. That is going to be their baby. That is going to be the one thing they ever do, and it matters most of all. And any sort of negative feedback towards it's going to hit them extra hard. But if you want to do this seriously, if you want to do this long term, if you want to do this prolifically, you can't get too hung up on any one thing. You know, like I've made the company Man because I thought it was probably the most colorful and the most marketable. It's not my favorite story I've ever written. I love it. It's a great story. It's a lot of fun. The characters are awesome, and it's entertaining, engaging, and I'm really enjoying working on it. But it's not. I don't have a favorite. I like them all for different things, and I'm going to publish them all. I'm going to create them all. I'm going to get there eventually. If you do have a darling, you know, kill your darlings. If you do have a baby, that's a blind spot. That's a hurdle that you're not going to be able to get over, and it's going to impact on your work. You need to get over that. You need to be willing to put a rope around its neck and kick it off a bridge and get on with the next thing. Once it's done, it's done. Commit it and move on.
Right. No, absolutely. And that kind of goes along with another thing I was going to say, but comics mate James went ahead and said, what you're writing also changes everything. Some people can write horror but can't write romance. I think that's an important distinction too, is to figure out what you can write, but also not be afraid to attempt other things.
Yep.
But I think the issue is that even that, a person who say you just can't do it, you can't write romance, that doesn't mean you can't learn something from reading romance, because you'd be shocked how many times romance and horror actually have the same structure,
same beats. Yeah,
because you have to give the person something they care about, and in horror the idea is you give them something to care about and then you take it from them, and you do it in such a way that it literally gives you, you know, that feeling. True horror gives you a feeling of where you question everything. You know, you question life,
that's the best
and existence. And
no doubt. And romance, it might be formulaic, but it's ironclad. It's solid. It is a pyramid of reliability. And if you can mimic those beats and those steps and that pacing, you're going to be okay. You're going to have a solid story. Now, the trimmings on the tree, the way that you hang the particular ornaments of character interaction, dialogue, action, that sort of stuff, that's on you. But if you've got that solid structure, you're off to a good start. You could do a lot worse than study the structure and beats of romance. I would stay away from mass-produced mainstream Hollywood rom-coms because they are super formulaic to the point where you can literally predict everything that's going to happen, even the dialogue coming out of their mouths. But you switch to some, and I'm going to say it, quality romance writers. I mean, it's still the biggest selling genre. It outsells literary fiction. It outsells horror. It outsells everything. You know, I mean, even if you take like the erotic porno type stuff out of it, and just pure good old wholesome holding hands, have a smooch, sit on the couch romance, that still outsells everything else combined. Like it's the industry leader for a reason. It gives people what they want in a way they understand, in a way they can rely upon. It's escapism. It's feel good. If you can hit all those in whatever it is you're doing, even if it is completely unnerving horror, and Stephen King's done that. He's given me all of those beats in an unnerving horror that made me go, I need to take, I'll come back to this book tomorrow. It's getting dark. I'll come back to it tomorrow. I remember reading Salem's Lot, and there's a bit where the vampires are outside the window scratching on the window, and it's like 10 o'clock. I'm like 12. I'm like, yeah, no, I'll just Tuesday. I'll have a look at this on Tuesday. I'm good. I needed a break, man. It was good. It was really good. But he had the human condition in there. He hit all those beats. You know, the good guys won and the bad guys lost. The dude was a master. I don't know if it's still in there anymore. I don't know if he's got too political for his own good, but the dude was a master, and you can study those people that have got the reliable career and deliver those things reliably. Stephen King, horror, romance novels. To say I can't get anything out of that is to close off that entire avenue of creativity. To say, I'll never have this tool in my toolbox. You don't know what you're going to need tomorrow. Who here hasn't had a piece of cut of wood or something and said, look, I'm just going to put that in my shed. I'm just going to leave it. I might need it one day. 6 years later, you need a piece of wood exactly that size. You're like, oh, gee, I'm glad I kept this little bit. Like, you're always going to, you know, unless you're intentionally limiting yourself, in which case you're going to be limiting your appeal and in that way limiting your audience. You can never say, I will never need that tool. Even like the erotic stuff, like I'm not into that at all, but there's elements of that. The intensity, the language, what they show, what they don't show, you could pull that out and use that for horror. Just hint at the horror. As we know, the creature behind the door at the top of the stairs is never as scary as ascending the stairs and opening that creaky door. That's always scarier than what we see behind it. So pull out that teasing language, that show but don't tell, that hidden part of erotica. Not that I can say I've read a lot of it, but I imagine that's what's in there, and apply that to other areas. To say I don't need it is to limit yourself as a writer. And why would you want to do that?
Yeah. No, that's really insightful because I'm going to tell just a quick story about editing. Oddly enough, the woman who helps me write currently, Amber Pines is her writing name. The first thing she ever, because I had her editing my stuff, and she said, "Can you edit something for me and just give me your, let me tell me what you like about it and what you didn't." So she sends me this book, and she it's basically just porn. It's just it's a long form porn, but it is just straight porno, and just the most graphic descriptions of orgies and all kinds of craziness going on. And she gets done, and I got done reading it, and I was just like, well, this changes how I view you as a person now. I can't help that. And yeah, that my whole thing, I thought she was like some choir girl or something. And I'm like, my goodness, this is just like, I was having a hard time reading it. And I was like, I just, this is getting too detailed. But I have to say, her ability to explain things, I was actually really impressed, because I was like, I'm no angel myself, and I'm like, that's actually, like, I could imagine what that felt like and what that was like based on her description.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing, like you said, like with horror or even action. Like, it could be an action thing and somebody's running away in a comic book. Somebody's running away, they have this thing, and there's, bullets flying, and you're protecting a young girl or something hiding behind a car. And the right description of what that feels like, and that anxiety will make or break that scene.
Absolutely.
And that's something that, oddly enough, those details sometimes are shockingly lacking in a lot of storytelling. And so I still actually gleaned something, even from something that almost made me want to puke. I'm like, glean something from it.
Don't you want put yourself in uncomfortable places too? Like, read stuff that you're not particularly interested, but read stuff that's going to offend you.
Right.
If you're
yes.
leaning on one particular political spectrum, find the rhetoric of the opposite side and read that. And even if it's what not to do, even if you learn what not to do, there's plenty of books and movies and comics even that I've read, and I'm like, I will never do that. That's not for me. It's not good storytelling. It's not good practice. I mean, it helps hone your editorial ability as well for your own work and for others' work. If you can look at somebody else's work and say, this is what I don't like about this, you can apply the same standards to your own work. If you can be objective and take that step back and say, this is not me, this is not who I am as a person, you can absolutely do that. Part of the reason I started reviewing indie comics on my channel was a bit similar to why you started this telling a good story. One, I wanted to point out, hey guys, here's a space for you to do better. Two, to sort of say, I think I could do better. And three, to establish that I know what a good story takes, what makes a good story, and then give people the faith to invest in my book and say, well, this guy, like Kemo, he said, this is what works, this is what doesn't. I agree with what he said. I like where he said he would take the book. I like the way that he talks about stuff. I like the way that he constructs the stories that he tells verbally. I'm going to give him my $25, $20, whatever it is, to buy a copy of his comic book, because I think he's proven to me, I think, that he's going to deliver on what he's saying that he can do. And that's what happened. The feedback's been overwhelmingly positive, and doing a review of other people's comics was instrumental in that. I think definitely read stuff you're not interested in. Not stuff that's going to be boring. Don't sit there and read like a science textbook, obviously, but pick stuff that if you read the blurb and you're like, that sounds awful, I do not want to read that. It's 99 cents. Grab it off Kindle, make someone's day, read it, do a review on it, do a video review, do a blog review. Like, what else are you doing with your time? If you're not actually writing your story, if you're not writing your next novel, what are you doing with your time anyway? Do you really need another New Game Plus run through of Elden Ring? Grab something that you're not engaged with before. Open up your synapses, waken yourself up and say, oh, I'm not into this, but I'm going to read it. This isn't my political leanings, but I'm going to read that. I'm going to read their propaganda, their rhetoric, and then I'm going to come back at it. I'm going to say why it did or why it didn't work. It's not something I do a lot, but I certainly don't shy away from stuff that holds an opposing point of view. And I got very strongly held points of view on these things. Like, they really don't waver, but it doesn't mean that I can't engage or be in proximity to that other stuff, even if it's just a cautionary tale, even if it's what not to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's and I always give myself, when reviewing, I actually used to have a reviewing channel that got taken down, deleted by YouTube.
Familiar.
And I said something like somebody didn't like, evidently, but the thing is that I always give myself the rule of I have to say one good thing and one bad thing about it. Even if it's a negative review, I have to find something good to say about it. And if I can't, then I don't review it because it's a waste of time.
That's a really great metric. That's a fantastic mentality to have towards it. It proves that you're impartial. It proves you're not just out to dunk on someone. It proves you're not there just to propagate your own ideas. I originally was going to make the channel like Western themed because of the little avatar I have with the hat and everything. You know, like Australia's there's a lot of cowboy elements out further out west you go, you know, out in the outback. So originally my reviews were good and bad and the ugly. And the good was obviously something good about the book. You know, I tried to come up with a couple of things. It wasn't always easy. The bad is what I didn't like. And then the ugly was kind of like a critical literary breakdown of the whole thing. Ugly didn't mean bad. Ugly meant here's the behind the scenes stuff, how I perceive it, how I see it sits within a cultural zeitgeist, what I would do differently. You know, that's where you really break it down into its individual pieces and start talking about how those things go together to make the comic that you're now reading or the comic that I'm now reviewing. And in that way, sometimes I'd really be racking my brain to come up with some good stuff to say about some of those books. And I think you can tell because you watch those reviews and like, wow, the good was 32 seconds long. It's like, well, that's all there was. But it was a very, it's a very valuable practice. You know, like review other people's works, you get better at writing your own works. Reviewing other people's works, you get better at reviewing your own work.
Right. And you know what, I'll tell you what, Australian Western actually is a very interesting genre as far as what I can tell of what I've read of it. And heck, honestly just came to me, one of the best Westerns ever put down was Quigley Down Under and you know, Lonesome Dove and whatnot. So some of the best Westerns actually, at least done the best as far as people's opinions of it, have actually been Australian Westerns. So that's a good.
Lonesome Dove's fantastic. I think it should be like a standard. If someone says, what's your top 10 Westerns and Lonesome Dove doesn't feature, it's like, I want to see you don't know what you're talking about. You know, not because you didn't value it enough to put it high. It means you haven't seen it, because if you've seen it, you'd know how quintessentially Western it is and how important it is in the structure of the Western genre. It would have to feature somewhere in your top 10.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's something to learn off of, if nothing else. So that being said, we're just going to go into a little more about, do you have a preferred genre of reading and of writing, and are they the same?
Reading's pretty broad, and that reflects my writing style as well. Like, I like to read everything from, it's got to have some sort of action. You know, even like the horror stuff is action of your fear, action of the senses. You know, physical, actual action. You know, Lee Charles with Jack Reacher, Chuck Dixon with Lee Von Cade. His Lee Von Cade books are fantastic. If you guys know comic book legend Chuck Dixon, he also writes novels, and he's got this whole series of this, you know, ex-veteran man of action type bloke called Lee Von Cade. There's like 8 books out. Go check them out. They're fantastic. You could probably get the whole lot for $10, and that's your weekend reading. It's excellent, really easy to read stuff. I don't like slice of life stuff. I don't like based on a real story. I don't like I said, you know, this in-depth treatise into the economic consequences of the Dust Bowl, while some guy's staring at his bacon on his plate, thinking about how much he hates his wife in 1928. Like, that doesn't interest me. However, Carnivale, that TV show set in the Dust Bowl about that traveling carnival, supernatural elements, just it's such a genre mashup. 10 years ahead of its time before anybody was doing that. I still wake up thinking about that. It's living in my head rent free. So it's as much the setting as it is the genre. It's as much the hook or the conceit. What can you get out of it? What interest do you get out of combining those two things together? I'm as happy to read about a knight in shining armor slaying dragons and saving princesses as I am to read about Prohibition era gangsters, as I am to read about the Wild West, as I am to read about some normal bloke freaking out because a finger is growing in his drain and is slowly getting bigger and encroaching on his life, which is a Stephen King short story if you haven't come across it before. And in turn, I write like that. I write as long as the writing has action. It can be action of the senses. It can be action of your fear, action of your morality. You know, it can be social action. You know, some of my favorite interactions are just those verbal sparring, that back and forth where people get one up on one another and they're coming at them, each other the best of what they got, and they're trying to put their case forward. A lot of that stuff in, you know, like early Game of Thrones type Song of Fire and Ice, a lot of those social interactions was like social combat, these people jockeying for position. I find that interesting. I'm just as happy to read about the War of the Roses as I am to read about cyborgs in the future, you know?
Right. And so we're going to take a quick break to chill a little bit, and we're going to talk about the Company Men, Dead, White, and Blue, which is available currently. It's in fulfillment, and it is in demand on Indiegogo. And so if anybody likes what you've heard so far, we've had somebody say this is the most they've read, or learned from a chat before. If that's inspires you to go throw some money behind this project and see about getting issues number 2 and 3 out at some point, then I seriously encourage everybody to go check this out, check out the project, look at the art. I like the black and I personally kind of like the black and white as much as the color, to be honest with you, because the lines.
A few people said you should just do a black and white ash can add-on. Just print like a couple of hundred of them, and if somebody wants it, $5-10 pulp print, just slap it into the order and off there, and just enjoy the black. Because Kelso is a fantastic artist. He's a real find. It's very fortunate to find. I found some submission pages he'd done for like a Punisher comic for Marvel, and I could see that he knew how to draw motorbikes and Uzis and helicopters and tack gear and that sort of stuff. I'm like, well, I mean, that's the Company Man, just throwing superpowers as well. So I hit him up and he said, yeah, man. I said, well, you'd be in it for 12 issues. It's a 12-issue, like it's just 4 stories of 3 issues each. The first story, Dead, White, and Blue, this is the one we're looking at now. But I've also got Hearts of Darkness, Cold War, and Insurgent as the next 3 stories that are made up of 3 issues each of 60 pages. And that's more of it to do with shipping than it is about pacing of the book. The fact is, shipping a 180-page book in any market is an absolute nightmare and would blow out your costs. So I decided to break it down into smaller amounts. Aardvark is in the chat there. He said he got his physical copy of the Company Men weeks ago, which is fantastic to see. Pretty much everybody's got theirs now. There's a few new backers, and their books will be going out this week. There's also a digital edition. If you're not sure, if you're sort of sitting on the fence and you think, oh, look, I'm not sure I want to check out what this is about, pick up the digital edition and come back for the physical. I mean, if you want to hit me up for the physical, and I'll only charge you the difference, because everybody who buys a physical gets a digital edition anyway. If you bought the digital and you want the physical, contact me and I'll get a physical sent out to you for the difference of cost between the digital and the physical. I won't make you pay for it all over again. It's more about getting books into people's hands than it is about making a lot of money at this point. Money would be nice. It'd make the project go a lot quicker and a lot smoother. But what if it's flash in the pan? What if you do 100 grand, nobody likes it, and it doesn't matter what you put out next time, nobody backs it because your name is mud. I'm getting overwhelmingly positive feedback. Long term, that's going to be worth more than actual dollars in the bank account.
Right. And putting out your best foot forward is always a good step for your first thing, because people, I mean, everybody has to start somewhere, but if you're going to be charging, you want to put your best foot forward. So,
especially with this boutique comic market. I mean, we're asking $25, $30, $35. I mean, mine's on the lower end of cost, but some people are asking $45 for a book that Marvel will charge $15 for, because it is boutique, right, because it is bespoke, because it is, we got to pay. I got to pay. I'm paying Kelso every time he sends me through a page. It's a couple of $100 back. Brazilian reals. It's
right.
It's a grind. So you do have to charge a little bit more at this point just to sort of cover even shipping costs.
Right. And so like I said, anybody who's watching this in the future that hasn't caught it on the live stream, if you like what you see, the link is in the description, and it'll be in the pinned comment as well in the comment section. Go ahead and check it out. And like you said, get a download of it. I don't personally like digital comics, but sometimes it saves you some money to just check out something you're not sure of. So go ahead and check it out, guys. Thank you. And now we're going to get back to talking about all of the stuff that goes into the sausage.
Yes.
So
we're just the casing, brother. The stuff is what we get from everyone else. Yeah.
Right. So, what is the first thing you do when you sit down to write a story? And I don't mean like, I understand most writers have the idea in the back of their head for 6 months, and they're just, it bakes in it. But what is the first thing you actually do when you sit down to write that story?
It'll be one of two things, depending on where the story's at in my head. Like you said, it does tend to bounce around in there for a while, depending on life, whether you've got time to sit down and do it. Sometimes it's such a burning desire, I'll just say, look, I watch the kids, I'm going to go in and just start writing, Sometimes I'll sit down because I'll start just straight up with the dialogue, especially if it's a comic script. The way I write a comic script is I write all the dialogue, no panels, no pages, no scenes, no action. I just write the dialogue as it's happening in my head like a movie. And if I get stuck, I sit there and I let the characters talk it through. I try a few permutations, the same thing. I might try the verbalization thing. I don't do that as much because I don't really need it. but I've been doing
Right.
this for a while. I mean, I'm 40. I've been writing stories for as long as I can remember. I've been reading comics for as long as I can remember. I do think my dialogue is really, really tight. So I can do it up here. But for other people, don't be embarrassed or ashamed to do it out loud. I used to do it. I don't do it as much anymore because I've got to a point where I don't need it. But it is a super important tool. Just because I don't doesn't mean you shouldn't. So I'll work through the dialogue in my head. Once I've got the dialogue and the story down, because there'll be times where it's like I would not even write who says what. I just write the dialogue, hit return, go to the next line, write the next line of dialogue, hit return, do it again. I don't even write. So, for example, in the company man, you've got Dura, Abbott, Cinder, Gates, Ramjet. I don't even write like Ramjet, colon, move across a couple of tabs and then write what he says. I just type all the dialogue out because as I go back and put in who said what pages it's on, what action happens for the artist to actually understand what's happening, it prompts the story in my head. I don't need to write that stuff as I go. It's all in there. So for a comic, I usually just sit down and just smash out the dialogue first and foremost. If it's a more vague concept, if it's more like a plot or a place, a feeling. For me, I've described it before as the seed of an idea. It's not so much, hey, what if Superman was found by Batman's parents? That's the speeding bullet Elseworlds. Fantastic story. It's not so much, what if X was Y? It's the feeling of being in a place. I'll get a sensation. It'll be the Old West. It'll be a cyberpunk city in the future or something. And I'll get the very tactile, very sensory overload feeling of being there. I'll hear it. I'll see it. I'll have the feeling. The feeling you get in your heart. In your chest, you can feel something. You feel pangs of regret or joy. I feel the feeling I would get if I was suddenly transported to that world. It sounds very kooky, but like some future cyberpunk city, I'm just like, bam, I now can empathize and understand what it would feel like to a degree. Obviously, I can't know fully. Anybody said, people, I know what you feel going through with your grief when your dad just dies. Your dad's alive. You don't know what I'm going through. You can understand I'm going through a huge amount of grief, but you don't know what that grief feels like. So I feel to a degree what it's like to be in that world. And that sensation overwhelms me. It surrounds me like an envelope. It surrounds me like Frodo with Shelob's webbing. It's all around me. It's all encompassing. I immerse myself in that world, usually just for a few seconds. And then I can go back to that feeling whenever I want. Once I've got it, once I've sort of like downloaded it into my, heart catalog of sensations, I can go back to that, re-immerse myself in that, and from that place, feel out what sort of world that would be like. So I put myself back in that world, and then I brainstorm. How the world works, who exists in the world, what the power structures are. I don't do huge amounts of world building. Like, some of these people will spend years and years building this perfect fantasy world with fancy and magic rules and all sorts of, exactly how the political system works. And this huge, look at George Martin with his, Song of Ice and Fire, how those family trees go. This guy's related to that guy begat that guy. That's a big job. Like, he must have spent a long time doing that. I don't work a lot of that stuff out beforehand. I let that happen in the process of general brainstorming or the actual writing of the story itself. So I'm either going to brainstorm until I get to a point where the dialogue kicks in because I've got a plot, or I've already got a plot and I've got the dialogue in my head and the characters are already talking and they're saying, hey, Lee, sit down in front of a computer and type this out because this has got to get done.
Okay. So that was actually my next question that I was going to ask, would be about whether you were a plotter or you use bullet points or you just made it up as you go. But clearly you have a hybrid of sort of the plotting and the making it up as you go and just sort of figuring it out. Once you feel like you got enough story, then you sit down and see how it works out.
And it depends on the purpose of the story as well. Like something where if I've been commissioned to write a script for someone else, I've got quite a few stories coming out this year that I've done as backups for other people's comics. Obviously, I can't talk about it yet until they announce it, but they're on their way. Something like that, I'll sit down and I'll plot it out super tightly because I know it's got a purpose. If I'm working on a larger story, like a 100,000 word novel or something, I'll sit down and I'll plot that out because the first couple of novels, I just sort of pantsed it. And there was days and weeks of indecision where I was trying to wrestle with what would happen next. And that led to me creating a video called how are you with swearing on your channel? You try and avoid it, not a problem.
Try to avoid the R-rated words. You can, if possible, if you can censor yourself a little bit.
Absolutely,
because I am trying to keep it family friendly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll do the acronym for the writer's block is BS and how to overcome it. Okay. And it was 10 ways to overcome writer's block that doesn't exist, because my theory was there is no such thing as writer's block. It's either you're not motivated to write. That's not writer's block. That's a lack of motivation. Go immerse yourself in the media, reread your stuff and remember why you want to do it in the first place. Go have a sleep. Drop the kids off at your parents. Like, that's a lack of motivation, lack of space, lack of time. That's not writer's block. Writer's block is you don't know what comes next. So if you don't know what comes next, that's your fault because you didn't plan it out well enough. And I can say that with certainty because my first 2 books was me constantly chasing my tail, trying to work out exactly what would happen next because I had A, I had Z, but I didn't know what was in between. I might have had B and G and Q, but there's so many missing bits that I was constantly running around in circles and going on long walks with the dog, just trying to figure out, well, how does this guy get there? Keeping in mind technology at the time. The first book set in the late 70s, so no mobile phones, pages are only sort of a newish technology. It really limits how, if you say, oh, go here, do this, and meet me back later, unless you get them on a payphone and they're sitting in their office waiting for your call, there's no way to contact them. So there's a lot of serendipity to try and get people to coordinate in the right place. So there's lots of little bits that I had to puzzle out. That was my fault for not planning it out well enough. If I'm writing a big story or a story for a purpose, aka I've been commissioned to do it, I will plot it out super tight and super fine so I don't waste time like that again.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I always do say that because I actually, even when I know what I want to write, sometimes I can't, there's something in there that's like stopping me from actually putting those words that I want to put down. I just can't get them right or in the right order. And so I'd say, just go do something else then, or go write something else then. Yep. And so I usually work on 2 things at the same time, because if I can't write this, I can go write that. And I'll go do something, write a short story, write something else, and then I come back to it. And I'm usually fine when I get back. It's just, again, sometimes it's just getting the words in the right order. Sometimes they're coming out and they're just coming out wonky, and it's like, okay, you just need to do something else for a second, just
you can't sometimes you can force it, but you can't always force it. No, if you sometimes you can knuckle down and go, like, I know where I've got to go. I've got to get this done. It's due tomorrow. And it's a bit like doing an assignment at university. You power through, you get it done. Might not be your best work. You can deal with that with the edit later on. Or you go back and look at it again. But sometimes you try to power through and you're not getting your best work. And you need to take that step away. You need to rest your brain as much as your hands. You need to rest your creativity. Sometimes your creativity needs a break to fill that tank up again. You've gone back to the well too many times.
Right. So how were you when thinking of a self-contained story, and like, so one issue or one release or whatever, whether it's a comic book, it's 20 pages, or it's long form graphic novel, or even a novel in general, an actual full length prose. What is your thought on 3-act storytelling? And like, how would you, if you use it, how would you explain it to somebody to make it more obvious? Because some people they hear 3-act and they think real simple, but it's not really that simple of a concept, really.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember when I was going through school, I graduated in 98 from high school. And my generation in Australia, if you talk to anybody that's sort of my age, I'm like 40, 41, 41, you say, what's a noun? What's a verb? What's an adjective? What's an adverb? Most of them will look at you blankly. They've heard the words, but they don't know what they are. That was not explicitly taught in most public schools. Like, my wife went to a private school, so she knew what those things were, but those things weren't publicly explicitly taught in public schools. The generation that I went through, there's people a couple of years on either side of me that just never, for whatever reason, the Australian government decided, or the New South Wales government decided, look, nouns, verbs, adjectives aren't that important. I remember one vague lesson, somewhere like year 11 or 12, where one of the teachers that sort of subbed in was like amazed that we didn't know what they were, and they're trying to teach them to us, and we're like, sir, we just don't care. We're 18, we just don't care anymore. Right. So
they're headed that way in America right now, though, by the way. So
yes, seeing a lot of that. And we were never, we're never explicitly taught that, so a lot of them don't know what it is. But if you were to explain it to them, they could say, oh, yeah, I get it. And they could list off a dozen nouns. If you say, sit down and write that out, sit down and write a story, they can write the story using nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and not even realizing that's what they're using. I even had the discussion with the teacher at the time. I said, sir, I don't know what these things are. I said, but because he was, he'd come in once a week and do a creative writing class with us. And every week you'd have to submit another story. And I loved it. That was my favorite part of school, was every week having to pump out another zany short story of horror and violence that fit in the criteria he gave us. Because after a while, he'd start to choose really mundane topics to try, and he wanted to move me away from, violent horror type stuff into broadening my horizons. And I didn't want it at the time. I was a kid with a chip on my shoulder, like every kid at that time. So I loved writing a story every week. It was a fantastic output. And I said to him, look, not being rude or disrespectful. I said, but you've given me 10 out of 10 and A's in every single story I've put in here since we started this. Do you really think I need to know what a noun, verb, and an adjective is if I'm already operating at this level? And he said yes, because of course he did. And he was right. But my point, I'm coming off like a real tool in high school, but every kid had a chip on their shoulder in high school. I've gotten better. Since then. My point was I didn't need to know those things to be able to write using them. So I'd say the 3-act structure is a bit like that. As important as it is, as much as it is the backbone, as much as it is the go-to, the standard, and people have expanded it to 5-act structures. People superimpose them over the hero's journey so you can see which bits fall into which part of the act. I really like K.M. Weiland's creating character arcs. It's a fantastic, it's like a modern hero's journey, because hero's journey can be very dry. And if it's not given in context, it can be very insular. So I find K.M. Weiland's creating character arcs to be a much more engaging, because she uses examples from pop culture. She goes, okay, this is how the hero's journey, essentially she's retelling the hero's journey, works in Cars. This is how the hero's journey works in the first Thor movie. This is how hero's journey works in some Steve Buscemi movie I've never heard of. As important as the 3-act structure is, and as much as you should go back to it, knowing it is great. And it is the standard for a reason, because it works. I think if you're widely read enough, you will incorporate elements of that into your writing anyway, instinctively. I don't think it's necessary, because it's so embedded into what we do, into what we read, and what we interact with, that we unknowingly mimic those beats and elements in our own work. I do think, as I said to you earlier when we were having a chat, I said, move away from the 3-act structure at your own peril. If you move away from that, I mean, move from there to the 5-act, sure, if you want to get more granular. Do the whole hero's journey step by step. Go buy K.M. Weiland's book for $4.25 on Amazon and see how she does it and follow that. That's fine. But they all have roots in the 3-act structure. If you're not going to be doing that, it's like they talk about Jack Kirby and his art, and he would say, learn the rules before you break them. It's a common thing. Learn how to draw a human right, then go nuts and draw the Hulk with like 16 abs and he's just traps are popping out and there's veins where there's no, like, learn the rules before you break them. If you're going to dive into this writing thing and you don't have a fundamental understanding of the 3-act structure, either formally or because you're widely read enough that you can mimic it unknowingly, I think you're going to have a hard time. And people are going to say to you, look, the pacing on this is wrong. Look at what's the movie I watched the other day? And the pacing was all off. The Kingsman. The pacing on that. Like, it had everything I want. Like, I love that era. Rasputin, the way they portrayed him as like this twin blade wielding ballet fighter, mystic poison cult leader. It was just like, I remember seeing the shorts of it going, oh man, this is going to be my thing. Like the other Kingsman movies were fun, but a little bit kooky. This looks like it's going to be more serious, grounded, start of World War I sort of stuff. The pacing on that movie, I can't even think of like a clever way to say, it's like, you say like a jumping like a June bug on a hot skillet or something like that. Was all over the place. I feel like there must have been 12 different writers take a run at that script. Everybody added a little something, took a little something. And by the end, it didn't even resemble a coherent story. About 4 times, I felt like the movie should have ended and it kept going. I'm like, oh, they've beaten Rasputin. That's a really quick movie. He was the big boss, right? No, now his son's going to go to World War I. Okay, so that's the end of the movie. No, now he's going to go on this last ditch attempt to wipe out this evil cult that's trying to take over. Like it just kept dragging itself on further and further, and it's clear to me that it didn't fit the 3-act structure, and it's clear to me that the person who wrote it either chose to intentionally move away from it, wasn't widely read enough to be able to mimic those structures to deliver a good story, or again, there's so much interference from other elements, other writers, producers, and that sort of thing. It left a Frankenstein's monster of what the original script was supposed to be.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes, honestly, with that being like the 3rd or 4th one, there actually might not have been an actual script. There might have just been producers saying, we're going to make a movie. And they sat down. Yeah. But one of the things is, I'm glad you said the intrinsic idea, because I think the 3-act structure is intrinsic to storytelling. Just because in its most, like, obviously we're talking about, the hero's journey technically has 8 plot points to get it out in its entirety. And that fits in a 3-act structure, oddly. But I think what, in reality, to tell a story, and the reason why it's intrinsic is because a good storyteller, and I'm talking about a liar, a kid trying to get out of stealing a candy bar.
Yes.
You have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have to have an inciting incident. You have to tell what happened, and then you have to finish it up in a way that makes sense with the other 2 parts. And so it's such an intrinsic thing that just being, again, a good liar, which that's what I started out as. I was a liar as a real young kid. And I started telling stories from it because I realized people actually kind of believed some of the things I said. And I'm like, huh. So I believe it's just intrinsic. And so, like, when I talk about, I think of 3-act structure, I actually do this thing that Steve Ditko did. And he's one of my favorite comic book guys because Spider-Man stuff. He would have an inciting incident on the first page, whatever it is. It would just be just one page. And then he would spend the next 17, 18 pages just building tension, just having things happen and build tension, and then have the blow off, the climax. And that's every issue, every single issue. It was just have an inciting incident and then just build it up, and then have the blow off. And I think personally, I kind of refer to it as a 2-act structure in the sense that as long as you have something to build, you build something first, and then you have a climax, you still have a story. As long as you're building something and then you have that climax, it's still a story. And you can even do like the Quentin Tarantino thing, where sometimes you tell the story out of order. You tell the second act first and then give the inciting incident just before the climax. And it still works because it still gives you a full story. It still explains itself. And you come out of it going, huh, okay, sure. Why not? But so,
and I would say, as well as his sharp dialogue, that's what makes Tarantino most memorable,
right.
Especially early on in his career. I mean, even like Kill Bill's my favorite of his works. It's all over the place. It starts off with her dying, and then it jumps forward, and then it jumps back. You get flashbacks. The second movie starts right back. You know, like the first movie starts with her getting killed, then pulling up at Vanita Green's house to kill her. Then it jumps back to how she killed Oran Ishii, and then she goes after Bud, and then you got the whole scene where she was killed. So the thing that happened before the start of the first movie is the start of the second movie. The whole thing comes together seamlessly, though. There's not a minute out of place, and there's not a point that doesn't make sense. It flows. It's an absolute masterpiece of storytelling, and it's a jigsaw. It's like you got the whole jigsaw, threw it up in the air, just put it back together wherever. But because all the elements are there, and because you watch the totality of it, the structure still remains, and you can make those connections.
Yeah. See, I'm the weirdo. My personal favorite is Jackie Brown, just because the style over substance is so great in that he could have put just about anything in there, and the way it's stylized, it probably would have worked. Just on its, just again, the style was enough to keep you hooked for 2 hours. So,
plus Pam Grier, I mean, she's good in everything she does. She's an absolute living legend.
Yeah. But so getting back to what's kind of things that are probably the bad part of storytelling, I like to talk about episodic storytelling versus serialized. And I personally think one of the big issues that the mainstream is having right now is not just bad writers, because there's a lot of really good writers at the big 2, at the big 3, whatever you want to call them, that are not telling good stories. And they've proven it, because they'll go to Image and release a book and it's like, wow, that's amazing. Why didn't Batman look like that? Or why doesn't... I think it's the episodic versus serialized, because everyone's telling the story. It's from the top down. You have to make enough to get 190 something pages for the trade.
Yep.
And so everything is so exploded out and just expanded that you just have so much filler and fluff that the serialization is really killing a lot of mainstream comics. And I think episodic, thinking it of that, even your book, that it's a long book, but have an ending, just have an ending that sort of in some way wraps up the story for the person. I think that's really important. And what is your opinion on that? Are the trades killing storytelling today?
100%. Like, I mean, the phrase "pace for the trade" is a real thing. Like, people go, "What about this guy's work on Daredevil? Oh, it's not bad, but it's pace for the trade." Meaning it is blown out, meaning that they are trying to make sure they fit that requisite number of pages. And it's there's a whole bunch of stuff behind it. Like, part of it's wanting to get people back to the comic book store month after month. We no longer get them at the newsstand. So, little Jimmy coming along and plopping down his 12 cents for an issue of the Avengers that has your inciting incident, your beginning, your middle, your end, wraps up neatly, and they defeat Ultron and move on to the next issue. Because you look at the old Avengers, every issue there was a new bad guy. Every issue there's a different bad guy. You got Phantom Stranger. You got not Phantom Stranger. The one that can shapeshift and take on people's appearances. You'd have a different guy every single issue, because like was it Todd McFarlane said, it might have been Stanley or Jack Kirby even, and he's just paraphrasing them. Every comic book is somebody's first comic book.
Yep.
Every issue of
Stanley.
Avengers, some kid's first issue of Avengers.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to just kick off from right there. Here's these guys. Here's who they are. Here's how they interact with each other. Show a bit of them rubbing shoulders with one another. A bit of that tension. A bit of that relationship. You can have ongoing stories, but absolutely it needs to be episodic. And I think we're seeing mimicking of that in the other media as well. The Marvel movies and other stuff like that. Big event movies type thing, they're all linked into each other. I mean, they're definitely episodic, but there's serialized elements in there, which enhances or detracts depending on your opinion on the movies. But take it even further. I talk about the Netflix generation, about the idea that they binge their entertainment. And that's a big problem with indie comics trying to get out your comic quick enough for people to care about it from issue to issue. If there's a year gap between issue 1 and issue 2, how many of those people are going to come back for that? We're at the point now. I started watching that Better Call Saul, not loving it so far. I'm like 5 episodes in. I'm not really feeling motivated to go back. People say it gets better in the second season. I'm like, I don't have that. I'm 40. I don't have that much time.
I can't dedicate that much time to something to get good.
No, if you can't get me on the first one, I'm lucky I gave him 5, honestly. But it's all there. There's like 5 seasons. So if you want to, you can sit through and binge the whole thing and get it as one big story. Like you live years of this character's life with him, right alongside him. That's got an appeal. People like that. People like getting involved. Is part of it's, I think, moving away from tradition of wanting to invest their identity in the pop culture and the things they like, the things that they, like people virtually worship Marvel in some regards. And a big part of their identity is being like a Marvel fan or a Disney fan. Is people who are just like Disney oriented. They have Star Wars weddings or Disney weddings, and they dress as the princesses in their off time. Like this is how people are putting their identity into things. So definitely people are wanting to hook their identity up to say Captain America and then follow his journey right up until he picks up Thor's hammer and does what he does. It's leading to more profitable storytelling, but it's definitely not leading to better storytelling. Right. It's leading to, like you said, it's padded. I remember there's times I used to the comic book store. My local comic book store shut down before COVID even, thanks to SJW Marvel, thanks to the fact there's nothing worth, like the guy just could not keep the store going. It'd been there for 20, 25 years. I've been going there since I was a teenager, and he could not get the store to stay profitable because nobody was buying the books. I'd go there and buy half a dozen books, and nothing happened in any of them. It's like this is issue 1 of a 6-issue run. It'll be some Wolverine story where he's out in the jungle somewhere and nothing happens. It's just 22 pages of talk, and then a hook right at the end. Oh, Sabretooth turns up. Really, Sabretooth. That's how you think you're going to get my money, with more Sabretooth.
Right.
Compare that to the punchy action that we used to have of episodic storytelling, where you turn up and you get a whole story in one issue, and you get that resolution, you get that ending, you get that payoff. You'd see progress in the characters, and if you followed it month after month, you'd see the characters grow. One of my favorite is West Coast Avengers. To see those guys grow in their role, to see Rhodey as Iron Man having to reveal the fact that he's not actually Tony Stark, he's not the real Iron Man. To see Hawkeye grow in his role as a leader, to see Hank Pym take that step back from being a hero. And then having to step back into being a hero simply because there's nobody else could do it. He's the veteran. He had more experience than everybody else in the team put together. He became like the den father of the whole thing, but he ended up having to step back into that hero role. Yeah,
absolutely. There's the thing about comics is that it's sad because 80 something years, 90 going on 90 years of history, and all of a sudden it's like, it survived World War II. And they can't survive the last couple of years. It's really rough.
They've forgotten what they are. They've forgotten the point of comics. Comics was never meant to be Netflix on paper. It was never meant to be this episode. You can look at Watchmen. There's 12 issues over, I don't know if it come out every month, every other month. Is this maxi series, the concept of a maxi series. That's fine. That's what that is. And you're committing to that early on. The kid going to the store to pick up an issue of Spider-Man or Batman shouldn't be subjected to Tom King's navel gazing lyrical waxing about his relationship with that's not going to engage the kids. That's not going to engage the new fans, and it doesn't engage the old fans either. And we see that in the move away from those titles. Like the sales are not doing well. The industry is not doing well. It's forgotten what it was meant to be. It was meant to be largely disposable entertainment. I know we've got a big collectors market, the whole thing, and I've got a bunch of books bagged and boarded myself. Everybody does. I've got boxes, long boxes full of them because you love them and you want to go back and revisit them. Why? Because it's that punchy episodic storytelling that grabbed you the first time around when you read it. You're not boxing and boarding them so you can read this huge run of Batman's Depression. It's the older books, the books that we love, the books that we come back to. Comics needs to remember what it was, why it was successful, and then find a way to emulate that today and find a way to make that relevant today, because they've moved so far away from what they were. Even if they were to immediately shift directions and go back to what that was, I still think they'd fail because it'd be too big of a cultural shift. And the people who imbibe comics wouldn't continue to buy them. And then the people who would want to buy them because of this new format wouldn't be aware of it. It's got to be a gradual thing. They've got to course correct over a period of time. They've got to make it up to the fans, and they've got to get back to where they were in a way that fits in with 21st century media consumption. I don't think they're capable of it. I don't think they're going to do it. I don't think they're interested in doing it. I think the comic book industry is all but dead. It's going to limp along for a little bit longer, and it's just going to be us indies. And I think it was Liam Gray had an idea about how Marvel might put all the characters in the Disney vault. Disney might put all the characters in Disney vault and then trot them out once every couple of years. You'll get a Spider-Man animated movie or series once every couple of years. You'll get a Spider-Man comic book in Walmart, every year or something, or every 6 months. But it's not going to be 22 pages. It's not going to be Dan Slott writing Spider-Man every month, 22 pages building up to a climax over a 9-month story issue or for the trades or whatever. Like that model is failing, and that model's moving out. Yaro's saying the collectors are the only ones left. Casual fans went elsewhere. He's not wrong. Like I never. If you'd said to me when I was, 25, are you ever going to give up on comics? Are you ever going to stop collecting comics? I'm like, hell no. I love comics. Every spare cent I got's going towards buying comics, reading comics, engaging with comics. I love the medium. I love making it. I haven't read anything from Marvel since probably Civil War. I haven't read anything from DC since New 52. Like, they lost me a long time ago. They've been on this path for a long, long time. It's too far gone to course correct. People are finding entertainment elsewhere.
As a kid, I was dirt poor, and so I read coverless comics. Yeah, which for 3 of them for $1, and because the guy ripped the cover off, sent them back, and got his money back, and then he sold them to me for $1. But so I never got full runs because some months they sold out, so you didn't get that month. And so I did a lot of indie comics. I was always doing like the oddball indie, the American Splendor and stuff like that. Like, even when I was like 8 and 9, I was, like I've said yesterday, I was reading stuff that no 8 and 9-year-old probably should have been reading. Yeah. But that's what I was into. So it was, for me, the first time outside of Spider-Man and Chris Claremont's X-Men run in the early 90s, the mid 2000s was the first time I had ever read a large chunk of DC and Marvel, and it was great for, like, oddly enough, what got me into it was, of all things, was the Green Lantern Rebirth. Oh yeah, I saw it. It was a beautiful cover. I picked it up and said, "Huh," and I read the 12 issues of it and said, And then there was about 4 years where it was great, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm going back to indies." So I think I'm just gonna go back to my oddball comics that. Crappy paper, and just I love that, though. I love when somebody has a story to tell. They don't have any money, but they put it down on paper and they print it on the cheapest thing they can get, and they get it out there. I love that. That's ingenuity right there, man.
I remember seeing dudes down at the library as a kid, like photocopying. I think you guys call it Xerox, like photocopying This is hand-drawn piece of A4 paper, and they've drawn the panels themselves with a ruler and a black felt pen, and they've drawn the whole thing, and they've got little speech bubbles barely cramped into the corners, and they're photocopying it, and they're stapling it there at the library. You think that's hustle. That dude's, he's gonna make something. Because he's not saying it's got to be perfect. He's saying, I'm going to make it, and then I'm going to make something else.
I used to do that. I used to write black market Ninja Turtle comics back when I was like 7, 8 years old. Cool. Yes. I would draw and write 15-page Ninja Turtle comics, and then go down and have them Xeroxed, photocopied, and hand them out to people at the playground and stuff. So
that's just good business, man. Yeah, that's funny. I only ever wrote my own characters. I've never.
That's the only one that was somebody else's that I ever wrote was the Turtles. Okay, yeah. And it was just because it was that era thing. That was my
absolutely
my childhood at the time. And so, but So I'm just going to touch on one thing real quick, and then we're going to start to wrap things up, just because I don't want to, it's not that, I appreciate the talking and stuff, but I'm trying to keep these shorter than like the 7-hour marathon some people are doing. So as far as the storytelling goes, there's been some talk, and like RJ from the fourth, what is it? Oh man, the fourth age, and Literature Devils talked a bit about Western storytelling versus Eastern storytelling. And I always like to just boil it down to the simple and say, Western storytelling is about the character. The story is about the character, and Eastern storytelling is about the story. Eastern storytelling, if you go read a bunch of those old Chinese stories, I've read hundreds, and they're basically just two stories that are just being retold over and over again. And so the story is what's important. Who cares? You could interchange the characters all day, but the story is what's important. So what is your opinion for today, for comics right now, for storytelling in general, novelization? For you, when you write a story, is it the character is important? What takes precedent, the character or the story? Like if you needed to destroy your story a little bit for your character development, is that something you would do?
I would definitely go with whatever suits the story first and foremost. And as for character versus story, it's the purpose of the story. There's some stories you write where, let's Lee Child's Jack Reacher. Like Jack Reacher's a very simple character, very black and white, very straightforward, more a force of nature than a man. If you saw the TV show that Amazon put out recently, just an absolute beast, just breaking dudes apart like Lego blocks. A good watch, a lot of fun. You could substitute out Jack Reacher for John Matrix from Commando. You could substitute out John Matrix for, any Dutch Schaefer from Predator. I know that's two Arnold Schwarzeneggers, that's cheating, but, these big, simple, strong guys with a very, very solid moral compass, always pointing true north, always doing the right thing. Those guys are very easy to switch out. So in those cases, it's more the story, it's the action, especially with Jack Reacher. You know how it's going to go. He's going to go into town. He's going to sit down. He's going to get himself some black coffee because that man loves himself some black coffee. Then someone's going to do something that he doesn't agree with. And he's going to tell him, hey, knock it off or else what? Well, I'm 6'5", I'm going to break your hand. And then the police come and lock him up. And then he gets released because he's a military hero. And then he finds out that the rich guy who runs the town is really into something bad. Basically, the first Reacher book is the first Reacher season is nearly every Reacher book out there, And you go back for that familiarity. You go back for that story. As people talk about, Reacher is this implacable force of nature. But you could really switch him out for nearly any other implacable force of nature character. It's more about what he does. Right. So in that case, it's the story. So in that case, you could say the Reacher books are more Eastern than Western because the character himself doesn't grow so much. It's how he reacts to the situations, and how he reacts to the situation is firmly seeded in who the character is. And who the character is this stock standard, black and white, true moral compass facing north at all times, good guy. So if that's the story I'm writing, sorry, go on.
No, I'm sorry. I'm glad you brought up Reacher just because I've used this with other people, that you're right. It's very Eastern in it, the way it is, but it's so simple. All of it is so simple to where that, like, I've actually told people before to go read the books, just go read a couple and then go write something. Because if you get it in your head that that's how a story develops, you could write 100 stories with that basis. And again, you can even change it up a little bit, but it tells just a simple story that is, because he is so unabashedly and like Nick Rekieta says, autistic in his thinking. The story works. Though, because his character is actually oddly vital to elements, because there are things he does that as a rational thinking person, if you really think about it, you say that's actually not moral. That you could say, because people sit there and say, well, not everybody who does a thing deserves to be shot in the face. Well, no, but in this instance, that guy does.
And especially when you look at the greater good. If I don't shoot this guy in the face, what's he going to do later on? Is he going to escalate? Is he going to get worse? Reacher definitely has his own set of moral. Like his true north is pointing to his own true north. And I would say that his true north is interchangeable with other characters like Levon Cade, like Dutch Schaefer, like John Matrix, those characters that will do the wrong thing for a right reason and not lose a second sleep over it. It's like you just killed that guy. You tortured. Look at Brian Mills from Taken. Another great example. He tortured people. He shot that French dude's wife in the arm and said, I will kill her right now in your kitchen if you don't tell me where my daughter is. I don't think there's many people in the audience going, hey, Brian, bro, come on, just ease up on the pedal there, mate. That's a bit rough. They're like, no, they're going through hell. And this guy it's this guy's fault, the French guy's fault that his wife got shot. Brian pulled the trigger. It was the Frenchman's fault because he held back on information that where Brian's daughter was. And he knew the sort of man Brian was. You don't sit across the table from Dr. Doom and talk smart with him. You say, yes, sir, no, sir, 3-bag, 4, sir. Because you know what sort of man you're dealing with. This guy knew what he was dealing with, and he chose to do the wrong thing. I'd say the same thing about Reacher. The problem is these guys don't know who they're dealing with. They think it's just another big bug. They don't realize this guy just does not waver. He is just an absolute, he's as close to a superhero without a costume as you're going to get. Right.
And that's actually, I actually have one of my characters. I like pulp. I write pulp a lot. And I have a character I'm working on, Mickey Spade, but I have a whole series of stuff already pre-written, and I'm coming up with other things. And he's a detective from the 1940s. And I really give him that 1940s sentiment. You know, he drinks, he smokes cigars, he calls women honey and stuff like that.
That's some of my favorite stuff. That's my jam. I'll read anything like that. If you're like, look, he's a detective, he cracks wise, he smokes too much, he drinks too much, and he womanizes. And like, take my money. Let's go.
Right. And then on top of that, he's a little messed up because he's a war vet that's seen some stuff, and he doesn't talk about it, but you can tell that's at the base of a lot of why he drinks as much as he does, and he does the things he does. But he does that where like there's a line where this woman is abusing these children, and there's a guy he sees who's taking care of the child, and he wants to take the child. And the guy's like, no, I'm protecting him. And in his mind, keeping the child near the woman is worth the fact that he literally the guy's talking, and in mid-sentence, he pulls his gun and shoots him right in the head.
Yep.
And there's a caption that says, you know, an internal dialogue that says, it's not the first time I've shot an unarmed man, but it's the first time I had no remorse. And I'm like, that's the type of,
that's good, man. I like that
Reacher thing where it's like, you get to a point where it's like, in his case, he doesn't have to get there. But in my case, I have to give the guy motivation to get there. But it's that thing where it's unwavering, unwavering in your storytelling. And I think that's really, really important. So I'm glad you talked about Reacher.
If you're going to go plot versus character, it's a character like that will draw me into a story. If you say, hey, there's this guy, because you know, the Jack Reacher, Levon Kay, these guys, the situations they're in, even like you said, you can see you guys are hard drinking, hard smoking PI war veteran. All right, Peter Gunn. Gunn.
That's it. Yep. That's a big chunk, believe it or not. Yeah, big chunk.
Love Peter Gunn. I've been watching them all again recently. Talk about episodic storytelling. They had 25 minutes to get you interested, set up the problem, entertain you, have a payoff that matters within 25 minutes. These guys were master storytellers. Not everything is, you know, but I'd say 8 out of 10. I'd say 7 out of 10 are great, 8 out of 10 are good, 9 out of 10 are entertaining, and there's that 1 out of 10 you're sort of like, I mean, that's not. It's a kooky one. You know, every now and then there's a kooky one. It'll be about some sort of Hindi yogi type sitting on his head or something like that's a weird one. That was a bit weird. But Peter Gunn's got that unwavering moral compass facing north, but it's his own north. He doesn't mind doing a bit of. He'll strong arm a dude. The one I watched last night, he threatened to kill a dude. He goes, Jacoby's a police officer. He's paid to uphold the law. He's going to look the other way while I shoot you because you're not telling me what I want to know. He goes, I'm a private citizen. I will shoot you and pay the fine for shooting you if you don't tell me what I want to know. He didn't mind threatening the guy and torturing the guy, beating him up. And in his mind, that was justified because he had somebody to save.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it has to be the right motivation or action for the right story, because sometimes you see people, and it's right now it's real common in indie stuff where it's just done for shock value. It's just purely to shock you. The character does something totally out of character for them for shock value. But it's like, that's not good storytelling. It might be shocking, but it's not good storytelling because your character needs to stay in character. And if he's willing to do something like that, you need to give either a reason for it, or you just need to make his character, like you said, unwavering enough to where that's just something he would do.
And there's got to be an aftermath to it. There's got to be either remorse or him dealing with it. If you're not somebody that you built up to that point, I think there's a real problem. Probably 20 years ago, there was an idea of that would get around a lot that any reaction is a good reaction. I'm just going to media. It's any reaction that's a good reaction. That's not true. If I hate your media and I turn it off, because not everybody's outrage merchant, not everybody's going to do blog posts and video reviews saying how bad this thing is and do you know 40 videos on how the new Star Wars is the worst Star Wars ever. They probably are. I haven't seen them, but if my reaction to it is this is gross and I hate it, I'm just going to turn it off and not come back. That's not a good reaction for somebody who wants to make money. It might be for some provocateur who's some shock, outrage street artist or whatever, but I'm not going to come back and look at their work a second time either. They're still cutting off an avenue of interest, an avenue of engagement. If you're making media and it's not to engage with other people, if it's not to be engaged with, I had an art school teacher, and she said, if you're making media and it's not to be engaged with by other people, you're masturbating. She said, you're just doing something that makes you feel good in the privacy of your own home. Yeah. It's not, if you're not making a painting to be seen on a wall or to be sold, if you're not making a book to be read, it's just masturbation. And she said, there's nothing wrong with that, but that can't be all you're doing. If that's all you're doing, think about it. You're just at home having a wank.
If that's all you're doing, then just keep it at home. That's right. If you're writing for you, then write for you. That's fine. But just don't ask somebody to pay for it.
That's right. And maybe you can't even call yourself a writer. If you're just writing for you, that's just self-reflection. That's journaling. Right. That's journaling with extra steps.
That's Paul Heyman promotion, by the way. That he's one of the people who started that. I'm telling you, with that ECW, every single event had to end with a shock, no matter if it made the people hate it or love it or whatever. And for wrestling, it works, but it doesn't work in everything. So
it doesn't. It's good. Even in wrestling, I think it's got a shelf life.
It does. Right.
I remember Steve Austin was just getting constantly screwed out of the title. Every episode of Raw, every pay-per-view for about 2 or 3 years straight. The whole corporate ministry run, like it was him versus about 30 guys, and he just kept getting screwed every episode. And it got to the point where you literally got sick of it. You're sitting there going, I'm so mad that the story isn't paying off. I'm actually wanting to not engage with the next one. They really pushed, in my opinion, they pushed it to the limit of how far people would tolerate that sort of thing before they had that big payoff.
All right. So we're going to go into final questions. I just have a couple of them. And I want, for the purpose of people who are watching this, who actually are watching it for learning things, and I'm going to probably cut this up and put it on like TikTok or something like that later. Yeah. What is the one thing you feel is the most important thing for your own development as a storyteller? And I mean that as in, what is something you did or something that, and I'm talking, you already said like the guy at the beginning, how he was giving you the prompts and stuff, but for you personally, what was a thing that when you did it, you suddenly said, oh, and that was like what developed you? Like, what was the thing? It could be anything. It could be anything at all, anything off the top of your head. What is the thing that was like your development as a storyteller hinged on that moment?
It's committing fully to the idea of being a writer, calling myself a writer and actually engaging in writing to the point where it's what I choose to do over just about anything else. Yeah, I bought a copy of Elden Ring, and there was a week there where the amount of Elden Ring I played sort of approached the amount of writing I did, but writing takes precedent. Writing is the first priority. Joe Catapano showed his progress as an artist from like 4 years ago to now, and it's been huge progress. I said, bro, that's incredible growth. Like, he went from being amateurish and competent to, verging on pro level, if not in the throes of pro level. I said, that's great progress. You must have really grinded. He said, I did. It was a big grind, but he said the most important thing was calling myself an artist in my mind, drawing every day, and committing myself to perfecting that part of my art. So I'd say the same thing for me, sitting down and going, I'm going to create something. I'm creating something for a purpose. I'm creating something because I enjoy it. I'm creating something because I want other people to engage with it. I am a writer and I write. And if I have a choice of doing writing versus just about anything else, I will pick writing. Someone says, you want to go watch a movie? I mean, I could, unless it's a movie that's really hooked me. I'd rather stay home and write my own. You want to play video games? Why would I play the new Ninja Turtles game when I actually played it mine? It was fantastic, but I played it multiplayer with my boy, and that was fun. I'd rather write than just about anything else.
But that's important, by the way. So that's important, by the way, for family though. Your kids, your wife, stuff like that. That's the one thing, is that sometimes you do need that. You need to keep that balance. You got to prioritize. I'd say it's my biggest impediment to getting more writing done is my family, and that's a good problem to have. It is very good. Yeah, I always tell people that you like that. I tell them just write. That's my thing. I tell them, how do you start writing? By writing. Just write. But the thing is, though, is like that. Do not lose like your kids or your wife or whatever in that, because that's your place to go when you're not writing. And believe it or not, for a lot of people, that's what re-energizes them and gets them back into writing again.
Without that, you just sat, you just sat recluse, shut in, sitting in front of his typewriter with layers of robes over top of you, click-clacking away with an eternal cup of cold coffee. There's no way to live.
Right. Okay, so for young writers or for those just starting out, I mean, heck, 65-year-old woman who has an idea to write,
Yeah.
what would you say? Well, you would get advice you would give to them. It doesn't have to be personal. It's just you and your experience of reviewing stuff and editing. What
Yep.
advice would you give them to improve and make it easier to write that first story?
Yeah, I definitely say read a lot. Make sure you're well read. That's a really important thing. It's impossible to sit down and write a quality story if you haven't read a lot. Like stand on the shoulder of giants, the people that came before you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even make sure you lean into a genre, that if you immerse yourself in the genre as you're writing. And if you're writing PI stuff, go watch Peter Gunn, go rewatch Maltese Falcon. People say, oh, but what if I'm influenced by it? That's the point. We want to be influenced by it. You want to take those non-verbal cues, those visual cues, those unsaid implicit things that make up the genre, and they will ooze through into your work. Don't make yourself an island. Don't sit there and say, I'm going to do this on my own. There's people who've done so much groundwork before you. Benefit from that. I can't think there'd be a single writer that would say, gee, I hate the idea that somebody read my book and was inspired to turn around and write their own. Like, go and immerse yourself in what other people are doing. I'd also say, look at books about the craft. There's a couple of really good ones out there. Like, there's a whole industry of writing craft books, and it's really hard to know the good from the bad. I was looking at some the other day, mostly for my wife, just because she's getting her head around a lot of new stuff, because I'm going through this process with my wife really at the moment. As talented as she is, I'm just trying to give her a bit more structure and direction. And there's so many books that have got 5 stars reviews and 1-star reviews. And the 5 stars said, best book I've ever read, so critical to everything I've ever done. It's amazing. I couldn't be a writer without this book. Everybody needs this book. And the 1-star is nothing I haven't heard before, rehash of old ideas. You can get a better version of this book or that book, or even, Strunk's, editing and style and those old books from back in the 70s or whatever, like there's so much out there. It's hard to know what's good. I'd say On Writing by Stephen King. Read On Writing by Stephen King. It's autobiographical, but it's also about his process. He doesn't say this is the right way. He says this is a way. He walks you through that. He introduces you to the idea that a bad writer can get good, a good writer can get great, and a great writer can be amazing, but a bad writer will never be amazing. So, people say sky's the limit, aim for the moon to land amongst the stars, whatever. Don't punch above your weight. Maybe start small. Start with small stories, short stories. Right. There's such an art to telling short stories. Like you said, being a liar, you're telling a short story. And you might not even be telling the whole story. You're telling the middle of it, the guts of it, the bit the teacher really wants to know so you don't get in trouble. But you've got to have built up what happened before. I'm doing it in reverse. And afterwards, you still got to have those things built up in your head so you can tell a good story. So read short stories, write short stories, immerse yourself in the genre, find good craft books. I've got a video on my YouTube channel that's got a list of the top, I think, 5 or 7 writing craft books, in my opinion. Amongst them is K.M. Weiland's How to Write Character Arcs. Amongst them is On Writing by Stephen King. And there's a couple of others I can't think off the top of my head, but go check that out. I'd say that's what I'd be doing. Another thing is find someone to bounce your ideas off. Find someone who's tricky, you might helpful if it's not a relative, somebody that's got some sort of investment in you, but somebody that you can trust. It takes time to build that relationship. We've got Aardvark in the chat. We've got Dean in the chat. Those guys, I'm happy to tell them whatever I'm doing, the deepest, secretive, the most spoilery parts of all my stories, knowing that I'm not scared someone's going to take my idea and run off and steal it anyway and do their own thing. But I trust these guys to give me feedback. So build a relationship with someone, get someone that you can bounce ideas off. Sometimes for me, it's like, hey, I'm doing this. What do you think's happening next? And they'll tell me what they think will happen next in the story. I'm like, I hate it, but now I know what not to do. And that tells me what I can do with the story. So definitely don't be an island. Don't cut yourself off. Engage with other writers and have back and forwards between them. And you'll have valuable input into what they're doing as well. It's a give and take relationship. See it as a symbiosis, benefit from it, grow from it, find your people, find your tribe, and working within that. Don't let it be an echo chamber, but within that, grow within the expertise that's there.
Right. Awesome. Could you do me a favor? And as soon as we get off of this live stream, go ahead and drop links to those videos in the comment section. And if I see them, I'll throw them even in the description to make sure people can get a hold of those so that
great.
They can see what you got. And we're getting ready to wrap up, but stick around after I do my little outro we'll chat for a second. Sure. But so the last 2 things are just what are you working on next? What's the next thing for you? More company men? What's the next thing people will see?
Sure. So I had obviously, like everybody, got a bunch of IPs, the stuff I wanted to do. I was developing this other book, so like street level vigilante stuff. But the cost of making comics is so exorbitant. It's ridiculous. I mean, the amount of money you put in versus the amount of money you make back, especially in the early days. If you're not an ex-pro, if you don't have that big support network doing a lot of the shilling for you, I'm really fortunate. I've got some really ardent, hardcore fans/friends who are constantly pimping my stuff out for me, and I love those guys for that. They've certainly done as much for me as I've done for myself, but comics are so expensive. I can't see myself developing a new IP at this point. I'd rather turn around and pull that money into something that has built a bit of momentum, has gained that recognition. The company man is seen, it is known, it is appreciated by people. It's got a bit of a reputation of being quality. It's got that really positive feedback from just everybody who's read it, so they really enjoyed it, or at least enjoyed parts of it. G'day, Hockey. So I'm going to be building up the company man in terms of comic books. I've got a bunch, like as varied as I write in comics, I write even more varied in prose, in novels. I've got so many books done or in a state of being done. I'm now developing a marketing rollout on how I'm going to market and release and distribute these books, because as good as I am at writing a comic, and comics are a visual medium, and as much as I enjoy that, there's a purity to writing novels, there's a purity to writing your story, and as much as X-Men 1 with Jim Lee on the art sold lots of copies, so did Lord of the Rings, that trilogy. Right. So I'm really looking forward to being known for my novels as well as the comics I write. I'm just developing how that's going to look, how a Lee approach to that would look to roll that out to the public, and having enough content that I can release it regularly and keep people engaged, so you don't have those 6 months or a year wait in between books. That's the problem with working in so many different genres. You're building up multiple IPs simultaneously. There can be a big wait in between each one. But if I commit fully to one and do 10 books over 3 years, say, that's roughly 3 every year, 1 every 4 months or so, counting editing and writing. It'll be 3 or 4 years before I can start a new IP, and I don't want to just do one at a time. So I'm doing this multi-tier build up on different IPs at the same time. So when it all releases, there's just going to be an ocean of content for people to engage with.
Okay. And by the way, just kind of going back to the idea of short stories, and you talking about writing a bunch of stuff, and especially novels. For people out there wanting to write a novel, they say, but it's such a big task. One of the reasons why writing short stories will help you in writing a novel is because the dirty little secret of writing a novel is, in reality, read a novel and focus on how that it's actually a bunch of short stories that are just telling an overarching story. Because novels, I mean, let's face it, they're even cut up in chapters. There's a reason why they're chaptered out.
Absolutely.
And so the secret is if you can tell a short story, if you tell enough with the same characters, eventually you can tell a long story. So when he's talking about doing novels are a great thing to get to, but you don't have to go for that right away. Short stories, like he said, short stories are the thing that will get you there.
Yeah. It cuts out all the fat. It makes you really lean, makes you very particular about what you actually put on the page. I've actually got a video again on my channel. I think it's like 7 reasons to write short fiction. If you're not writing short fictions, here's 7 reasons why you should be writing short fiction. I consider them the peak of fiction. I consider them probably the most important form of fiction, but also the most overlooked. If you want to get good, read a bunch of short stories. If you're not, if you're into horror, go pick up Stephen King's short stories. He's a master of short storytelling. I don't know. Yeah. They're not as well, stands like this thick and people love it. Go pick up one of his collections, Nightmares and Dreamscapes or Skeleton Crew. There's like 30 fantastic short stories that'll scare your socks off and keep you engaged within this one volume. He's so good at it. And you'll see just through osmosis, you'll pick up that quick punchy style, the quick setup, the middle and then the payoff. And it's the open-ended payoff, the fully wrapped up payoff, the one where you can make up your own mind about it. There's so much variety within those stories. It's a masterclass in how to write. You probably pick it up for $2 at the secondhand bookstore. Those books are 30 years old. Go pick up Nightmares and Dreamscapes, read the whole thing. Go pick up Skeleton Crew, read the whole thing, and become a better writer just from having read those 2 books. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the last thing is just, where can people find you? How do they support you? Do you have a website? What do you got in the works with that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on Twitter as Lee Byron Carver. You can see the handle there on the page. I'm on Instagram, but that's only really for Warhammer 40K stuff. I don't really do any, as a writer, I haven't really, I don't want to show previews of the art and stuff. I leave that for the artist. Kelso, he's on Instagram, so you can find Kelso Mazine on Instagram with previews of Company Man stuff that's coming out. I got my YouTube channel, Kemosabe Returns. The book's currently, Company Man Dead, White and Blue is currently in demand on Indiegogo, so you can find that there. Once I close the campaign next month, I'm going to do a wrap-up, post out all the ones that have been the last few backers, and then start looking at marketing book 2 and moving on to book 2. I will be putting the Company Man up on CG Now, so you can get copies of the standard edition of Company Man Dead, White and Blue on CG Now website, which is, I think it's just cgnow.net, I think it is, that Bancroft set up for all the Comicscape books to be featured on. I definitely want to work on a website, but I want to work on a website when I've got more than one book to sell. When I've got a couple of issues of a comic, when I've got a couple of novels out in the wild, and I've got, half a dozen things I can put up and actually sell in a store, I'll definitely finalize a website at that point. I don't have one at the moment. Because at this point, I feel like I'd just be saying, go to the Indiegogo and back my book, which probably doesn't hurt to have that extra exposure, but I haven't got there yet.
Okay, sounds good, though. It's definitely, for people out there, I know Twitter is, people call it a hellscape or a hellhole or, whatever. It is what you make it. If you follow good people that are being positive and talking about the stuff you want to talk about, then it is what you make of it. Just learn sometimes to put blinders on and follow him on Twitter and, see what he's doing, because he makes a lot of comments. He makes a lot of, he shares a lot of other people's stuff out, which is always good to,
I'm always happy
to new people.
Retweet other people's work. If you've got a project or a property, a comic or book, whatever, and you think it's good, hit me up and I'll retweet it. I got a couple of thousand followers, so that'll get a little bit more exposure. I mean, if somebody follows me, I usually check their pinned tweet, and if it looks good, I'll just retweet it anyway. It doesn't take, it's 2 clicks. It's literally no work at all to retweet somebody else's work. And if it gets eyes on, I think that's the biggest impediment to the success of these indie books is getting eyes on. My sell-through rate's about 5%. So 1 in 5 people buys my book who look at it. If I could get 10,000 people to look at it, I'd be selling to 5%. If I get 1 million people, I'd be selling 5% of that, I would assume. So getting eyes on. Yeah,
but it does scale up generally speaking, but you're right, 5 to 15%. I mean, the biggest guys out there aren't getting more than 15%, even on their best day. So
I was doing well to get 5 for a first campaign,
absolutely.
honestly.
And that's because
3 was good.
Well, that's because, and 2, you did it in a good way in the sense that people started seeing you in chats and seeing your comments, and they kind of said, "Hey, okay, what about this guy?" So
you got to be all in marketing these days. You can't just say, "Here's my book. I'll let my work speak for myself." That's a dying business model, because people go, "Well, if you can't even be interested enough to tell me about your work, why would I buy it? And if I don't buy it, I can't let it speak for itself. So it's just going to sit there in your shelves." You've essentially masturbated in public. You haven't given me a reason to engage with your media.
Right. Absolutely. So with that, we are going to close down this live stream. And I would just like to say that my guest, the Man Called Kemosabe, Lee Byron Carver, is quite the brain, as you can tell. And so watch his videos, do what you have to do, because the one great thing about independent artists and independent is that they can talk about what they do, and they can talk about the craft without somebody filtering it for them. And so getting that unvarnished truth about telling stories is really important. And you will get a lot of really good advice about telling good stories by following people like the Man Called Kemosabe. So I thank everybody out there for watching. I say, if you would please do all the YouTube stuff, which is liking, commenting, subscribing, telling your friends by sharing it, all of it. And I'm telling you what, if you hated it, please, I insist, go ahead, give it a thumbs down and leave a really mean comment about why it sucked and how much you hated it. I will, if it is mean enough, I will definitely give it a star and feature it. I might even pin the comment. So
yeah,
I insist, if I suck, let me know why I suck. And with that, I thank everybody for watching us, and you all have a good night or a good day wherever you are in the world, and God bless.